Welcome to Show Money, the only show exclusively dedicated to the business of mixed martial arts. We've had 2 months off. We're back. Once again, we've got our lawyer, Jason Cruz, the man who knows everyone and everything in mixed martial arts, John Nash, and myself, I'm the economist. Bloody elbow for me and John, MMA payout for Jason. And the news of the week is, of course, Conor McGregor and what's going on with is he in or is he out of UFC 200? And with that, Jason, take it away.
Yeah, so just in case you didn't know, Conor McGregor is the king of social media. And he sent out a tweet last week saying he was retiring. Of course, he wasn't really retired. But he is off UFC 200, at least if you believe Dana White. He did send out a tweet Sunday saying that he was back on, but he is actually not back on. So let's start talking about what we think of this and what are the implications for at least UFC 200. If anyone wants to jump in, Paul or John?
I think it's great for us because the traffic being generated is going to help a lot of guys working in the MMA put their kids through college. So, so I hope it continues for the next 3 months, this squabble, because this is great business for people in the MMA media side of the business. For the fans, they might hate it, but that's from that point. But it's a little fascinating because we seem to be getting a lot of different messages about what it's about. On one hand, he retired, and there's a lot of stories of why he retired. He says it's because he doesn't want to do the promotional part of the promoting that they asked for. The UFC is saying that he was taken off the card of UFC 200 because he didn't do what was required of him, promoting. And it seems a little strange that you would lose potentially millions upon millions of dollars pulling a guy out just for not flying in to do an ad. But I guess at the same time, that's the way the UFC, they expect of their athletes. That's what they want. But I guess to you, Paul, we'll start with you. I have a question towards you. Does this make sense to you, what's going on, or do you think there's something more going on behind the scenes?
It makes a little bit of sense to me, and I can honestly see it going either way. My first thoughts on this were from my professor perspective, right? I'm a professor, and I deal with students all the time. They're MBA students, but MBA students are great. But even then, you constantly have people asking you for favors, asking you for special requests, wanting to finagle things this way, this and that, right? And while I haven't talked to a lot of the UFC people, I've talked with local promoters, and all you hear about, right? Well, not all you hear about, but what you constantly hear about is, man, it's so hard for fighters they say they're going to show up for this event, they come up with some weird excuse. It's hard to get fighters to do this, to do that, right? That they're just making sure they show up on time, on weight, all that kind of stuff, right? And so I'm picturing it from that perspective, where if you're the UFC, right, and my professor perspective is, one thing I do is I make a syllabus that's really strict. I always stick with it, at least from the beginning, and you do that thing where you look, right, you're looking like you're tough and there's no breaks, and then you can always maybe make some excuses along the way later for the special cases. And it makes me wonder if the UFC is sort of showing their strength now, saying, hey, when it comes to promoting fights, you always have to be here. You have to be here. You have to be here. We'll kick anybody off the card. But if they really wanted to get McGregor back on there, they could sort of make up some sort of excuse as to why this is a special case, so that it doesn't open the floodgates of fighters saying, oh, I don't want to show up to this conference. Oh, I don't want to do that. Oh, I don't want to do that. That's what I'm thinking of. I do that as a professor all the time. The rule pretty much is you start strict and you can lighten things up. I don't know. What do you guys think about UFC's strategy here? So I could see him ending up off or on the card.
It's two big interesting things. The first thing is that this is the first time in a while where you see a holdout in MMA, basically a holdout in MMA, where the actual fighter has some leverage. Or conceivably has some leverage. I mean, whether or not you believe the tweets or whatnot, you look at how many times his tweets are being retweeted, who's looking at it. He obviously has an audience. And so with that, and the fact of the matter is, the last 3 times he's fought, he's basically set record upon record upon record, and so there's some leverage for him. But the other interesting is when Dana White shows up on Colin Cowherd's show. He doesn't. He is not the Dana White angry at Conor McGregor. You kind of get the sense that I'm not mad at him. You kind of get the sense when he says things like that he's still trying to soften the stance, trying to still work with the guy, rather than how a lot of people see Dana White as this cutthroat kind of guy. And when asked, I think if he could still be on UFC 200 if he were to call up, Dana White says he could still be on the card. So I think those are two very interesting things. Both sides do seem to are doing the dance, and they each need each other, and it'll be interesting to see. It's going to happen in the next couple weeks or so, that they come to some sort of whether or not he's on the card or not. If you have any other comments, I think one of the other questions that I had for you guys is, who do you believe is right or wrong here? Is it McGregor that's in the right, or is it the UFC that's in the right on their stance?
Personally, I think it's possible both can be right. I think you can always have a situation where both people at least think they're right. I can sympathize with McGregor for not wanting to do more promotional stuff. From all accounts, he does a tremendous amount of promotional material. And in the contract, it asks for a reasonable amount of promotion. At least all the UFC contracts I've seen demand a reasonable amount of promotion, but it doesn't quantify what a reasonable amount is, and it's not like it's laid out that everybody does an equal amount of promotion. McGregor seems to do a lot more than everybody else. And this fight means a lot for him. Not just the fact that it makes money and he has to promote it to bring money, and this fight means a lot for his future career. If he loses again to Nate Diaz, that is a massive hit to his future potential earnings. And so you can understand that he wants to only be focused on this fight. He thinks, in his head, I've done you a lot of favors. I've brought you in tons of money, much more than I made, and I'm also been promoting the heck out of all these events. I took a short notice fights twice, and now the least I'm asking for is I can focus on this biggest fight of my career right now. So his makes sense. For the UFC's point of view, they have a business. They don't change their business model really for anybody. They curtail a little bit, but they stick to the model. And it doesn't matter how big a star, how much money they can make. They are not going to let people push the bounds too much. They've always pushed back or kept people. They have a business model that dictates they're in charge. So they're not going to let a fighter start dictating stuff. Otherwise, that's not the model they operate under. They operate under the UFC model. So, if you look at it, if it was just financially, when people say, "Oh, Conor has so much leverage, look how much money he would make, and why would they turn down this money?" Remember when they were going to sign Fader, and they had projections that Fader versus Brock would blow away UFC 100 numbers, and yet they couldn't come to terms. They wouldn't agree to Fader's demands to co-brand. It wasn't really co-promotion they're asking for. I guess from all accounts, Fader's people were not asking for 50%. They wanted the right to brand it as a co-UFC M1 event, and Fader wanted a contract that could make sure he could get out after a couple fights. They didn't cave into that, and that's that's millions upon millions of dollars they left on the table because they didn't want to upset the model they had. So I think that's, from both points of view, it's smart of the UFC. Why break what's working? They want to keep the system in place. And for Conor, I sympathize with him. I guess the question coming forward, though, is looking at the amount of some fighters are making fun of Conor, mocking him and rejoicing in his problems. Other ones seem to be rallying behind him. For both of you, do you think there's a concern for the UFC that he could suddenly turn into some sort of cause celebre or some martyr for the frustrations of some fighters under the system?
He could. Let me just read to people really quick from the Eddie Alvarez contract, just so they know what you were talking about. It's one of the clauses, and it says, fighters shall cooperate and assist in the advertising, publicity, and promotion of the bouts, including making appearances at a reasonable number of press conferences, interviews, and other sponsorship and promotional activities. at times and places reasonably designated by Zuffa. So one of the things we don't know, I don't think we know, is what are the required, right, what are your required obligations? I was always under the impression that it's the initial press conference, that it's the what the conference call 2 weeks out, something like that, and then a ton of stuff the week of. But other than those three main things, like the appearances, what McGregor talked about in his what was his Facebook post was appearing on whatever morning show, right?
I think he was talking about the ESPN car wash that they drive into
Right.
Connecticut.
I think he's actually talking about the morning shows on each of the affiliated networks that he was appearing on. Before,
Yeah, and so do we know, are those required or requested, right?
I'm sure they're requested.
Yeah, so I mean, but I don't know. It's clear. It seems clear you can't miss the press conference, the conference call, and a lot of the week of stuff. But I don't know if there's room. We don't know if it's sort of those other sort of morning show things are required elements. So it just seemed, in his comment, it didn't seem necessarily consistent with saying I don't want to go to Vegas, but then talking about all the morning shows. And we don't know.
He was also he was to come to Vegas to shoot ads, right?
Right.
For this, to shoot spots. Then he had to go to an event in Stockton,
Right.
and then an event in New York. So
Right.
that would be his press junket for this one, like a 3 to 5 day press junket.
Yeah, and his Facebook post, it seems that he was more worn out from all of the, like, waking up, going on the radio, waking up, going to blah, 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 Podunkville morning show, right?
Yeah.
It seemed that was what came off as his frustration, not necessarily, a few days of doing major media obligations. But that's the way I took it. I don't know. But it got me thinking, do we know what's actually required of them? Because, in the Alvarez contract, it doesn't have specific, hey, you need to be here, 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 and here. And I was always under the impression it was these three major things, and all the other stuff was stuff you could do if you wanted to. But I'm not sure. Do you guys know about that?
I think it's intentionally open, isn't it? It seems like it would be intentionally open aired because they request, and they make requests, and the only way you can not do the amount of promotion they need is to say that's unreasonable. But can you contest that?
Yeah.
I do think that the UFC does pitch a lot, especially now, especially for UFC 200, pitches a lot of media, mainstream media for these things. So, like, you always get your Jim Rome radio. You probably get a couple nighttime network spots, late night talk show hosts. But yeah, maybe it's the morning shows where McGregor feels like he doesn't really need to do it. Going to ESPN for the car wash, where you go to every show on the ESPN dial, that kind of thing could be a taxing thing. I think the UFC Embedded this past for UFC 197, it shows John Jones going through that whole process of going up to where are they in Connecticut? In ESPN. So maybe that's what he's referring to, just in terms of, I don't want to have to do a CNN money or CNBC money spot where someone doesn't know what I do just to promote UFC 200. I think that's what perhaps that he's wants to avoid, because he wants to focus on this fight. So I definitely think that there are core things that they need to be at, but I definitely think that for UFC 200 or possibly wanted him to do more.
Yeah, what did you guys think of the fact that people who talk about this keep bringing up how much money the UFC is going to lose, and that kind of pivots us into the Darren Rovell thing. But you heard it before the Darren Rovell thing. For those who don't know, we're recording on the afternoon Monday afternoon that the Darren Rovell piece came out. But you were hearing it before that. Oh my God, they're going to lose so much money. And
it's absurd to me. First of all, it's yes. When Conor doesn't fight, if Conor doesn't, let's say Conor stayed retired forever, they wouldn't make as much money as they would if they had Conor fighting. But they still make money. They make money no matter what. They make money on a terrible Demetrius Johnson selling pay-per-view. They make money no matter what. Conor, though, he ain't making anything now that he ain't fighting. So when people pretend, oh, Conor has so much leverage, the UFC's got to cave into him. No, they don't. They're still going to make money, just not as much. Why Conor's not going to make any money? I think that tells me one side has still a lot more leverage. That Darren Rovell thing about the money, though, too, it doesn't make sense. Is sure, first of all, his numbers are off. You I'm not even explaining why they're off, because if you can't tell, then you take remedial math or something. But him not being on 200 means UFC 200 is not going to make as much money. I think that's a given. But that doesn't mean the UFC is going to lose money, because now they'll put him on UFC 203. And UFC 203 will be a big hit, and 205 will be in New York and be another monster hit. And it just pushes the sales down somewhere else. The reason it hurts the UFC is they want 200 to be a massive hit, because it's almost like coming out party showing how well the UFC succeeded. The number 200, they'll get extra attention. They can use it as an example to people, like, look how far the UFC's come. And that's it. It's more of a celebration of the UFC and a sales pitch for the UFC itself that does well, which is why they want it. But it doesn't affect it barely affects UFC bottom line if he comes back a month or two after UFC 200.
Yeah, I mean, there are tons of times people in business make decisions about their business principles and sacrifice a little bit of money. But, I mean, yeah, Darren Rovell didn't recognize that it kind of just shifts McGregor to a different event. It kind of blew my mind. The question is, do you really think you're losing one fight out of his career with this? And I don't. I think he's just moving to a different time. And is it going to hurt your bottom line? Yeah, a little bit, but not nearly $45 million that he pulled out of his ass.
The fight doesn't disappear forever. It's not gone. It's just not that day.
Right.
The money just, it's like, you work at construction, you had a rain day. Did you lose the money forever? No, they'll make you come. Maybe you can come on Saturday and make it up. You still got the money. It's that was a little confusing on that one. And the other thing too is, and that shows the power of a promoter, is the repeat players. As a repeat player, they can think long term. Why fighters have very short careers, and that's why when people say, "Oh, Conor's got all the power," no, I think eventually they'll have to cave in, or at least whenever they come to a mutual agreed decision, the UFC is going to have to give up very little compared to what Conor will have to give up. Conor will have to meet him much more on the UFC side than the UFC will have to meet on Conor's side, because no matter what, they'll stay in business. They're repeat. They get chance after chance after chance to make this money. Conor's got a limited amount of fights.
Yeah, the repeat players, and when you're around business people, you'll see, especially ones that have to answer to analysts or talk with analysts. The analysts are constantly bombarding them with questions and wanting to know about the future, about next year, about what are your numbers going to be. Not really this year. I mean, this year does matter, but what are your plans for the future? Right? How are you going to achieve these metrics? How are you going to achieve these targets? So their mind is not. And not saying this doesn't matter, but their mind is constantly on what's happening in the future down the line. It just feels like people were giving way too much credit to, oh my God, the UFC is going to lose money relative to what they would have had on 200. How could they do that? You're so stupid.
And actually, this is a good one for you too, Jason. There's always been these rumors that the UFC is for sale. In a weird way, Conor not fighting right now doesn't hurt their sales price. It actually helps it, because now you have another Conor fight loaded up in the. If you're going to sell today, you're like, we're going to sell, and we have a Conor fight waiting for you. Instead of saying, oh, we used up Conor and he lost, he's not as valuable.
That's definitely what you could sell to any potential people, assuming that one day they might sell, is because you don't have a second loss on Conor, and then he's prepared down the road to a fight. I mean, there is that theory of, maybe they want everything to culminate at UFC 200 with the hopes that, an eventual whatever, a rumored sale or whatnot happens afterward, because then you have a big pop, and then what is it? You buy low, sell high, that sort of thing. But that's just mere speculation on our part. But it's definitely something that if you were on an investor call, like Paul was alluding to, you would say, "Hey, we got McGregor loaded up. He's still under a fight contract with us. He's not going over anywhere else. If he's going to fight, he's going to fight with us, and he'll be showing up anytime soon." That kind of thing. But just to kind of go over a little bit for the people that don't know about the Darren Rovell ESPN article, the story is McGregor represents estimated $45 million boost to UFC, and you can judge for yourself if you guys go on ESPN and look at the numbers he comes out without Conor McGregor on UFC 200. He estimates that the card will do 525,000 buys at $70 a pop. It generates $36.7 million. He estimates a loss of $7 million in gate. If Conor McGregor is on UFC 200, the gate he believes could be 10 million. Not sure what the numbers are. And then he threw in another $800,000 for merchandise.
Yeah.
So all of that came up to $44.5 million according to Darren Rovell.
And why it doesn't make sense is the 500,000 pay-per-view loss. He didn't do the cable split. The gate people. I don't know how it affects the gate because the ticket price I think is already set, and they have a set number of seats. So they're going to do. I imagine even if let's say some of the tickets are not bought, some of the tickets aren't bought for are left unbought because people are so pissed that Conor ain't there. It's still going to do much closer to the Conor number than it would the normal disparity between Conor and a typical UFC event. So
and then the other thing that he brings up, which I mean, I don't know. He says that at UFC 200, of course, they have the Fan Fest, and he predicts that 10,000 fewer people will not be at the Fan Fest because of Conor McGregor. I mean, he's making that direct assumption. So. There you go. You could go on ESPN and check it out for yourself if you don't believe us here on the pod.
It was just really bad. I was surprised. Well, you guys, if you know about Darren Rovell, you don't get too surprised with this. But someone of his stature should not be doing that. I swear, every ESPN MMA piece, Brett Okamoto should have the veto power on it. He needs to preview everything they do.
Editorial.
That's my stance.
Now, the question going forward now is with Conor for both you guys is what do you think happens? Like, Paul, what do you think? I mean, Dana said that no matter what now I guess, and I don't know, I take it for what it is, a grain of salt, but Dana said that he's off 200 no matter what now. And at the same time, they were going to try to get Nate Diaz a fight. He kind of hinted that he ain't fighting unless it's Conor. So it's it's kind of these dominoes are starting to topple. There's weird repercussions. But what do you predict is going to happen now?
Right, and well, that's what I was saying. I could see it going either way. But the UFC's taken their hard stance. The excuse the UFC could use to get him back on the card is, well, Nate Diaz insists on fighting him and says he's not going to fight anybody else. And that sort of says to fighters, look, you still have to do all this promotion, but in this one instance, we're letting McGregor back on the card because his opponent insists on fighting him. So I could see that happening. I could also see the UFC sticking with their stance. This is one where I honestly don't know. I don't really have a good prediction. I could truthfully, honestly see either thing happening, him on it or off. What do you guys predict?
I was actually looking at the calendar, and tickets go on sale to the general public Friday. Actually, if you're a special UFC guy, you could get in there Wednesday. But it'll be interesting to see in the next 48 hours whether or not something will be resolved because tickets go on sale. So if you get the actual official announcement, and maybe McGregor was just trolling just to do it, if you get an actual official announcement, Diaz McGregor, wouldn't that boost the sales for the later this week as opposed to if you don't have? I mean, if you got Edgar Aldo is I guess your top of the card right now. That's that's a nice fight, but is it really? Would you really pay enhanced ticket prices for that? I mean, I don't know.
Well, considering how well Edgar Aldo did the last time they fought with a stacked undercard too, and I feel bad because I thought that was a super fight in my book. That was like one of the fights I was most intrigued by. But that did like 300,000 buys with Overeem. I think Overeem Bigfoot and Rashad Evans versus. It was top to bottom. Like every fight was a major fight on that card, and it still did very little of the box office.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Frankie Edgar, but if you go back and look at his pay-per-view history, it's not that impressive. I don't know. Maybe you could blame Gray Maynard for it, but I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Not that good.
He had Edgar and Gray Maynard at one of the greatest fights ever, and then when they do the final bout of their trilogy, it still sells poor. So
Yeah.
there's a secret ingredient sometimes to success. Well, I think it's unfair too to measure guys by pay-per-view all the time. I think some guys are stars, but they're not pay-per-view stars. People don't want to dish out $60, but they'd love to tune in and watch them. Or if they're hardcore fans, they would spend $10 for Fight Pass to get those guys, and you could still make a lot of money. You just can't get them on pay-per-view. But the McGregor thing, I think. I mean, me personally, I just think it's going to happen. Is he's not going to be on 200. They've already written it off. They're already planning their next big super event to be the Madison Square Garden event. I think they've downsized their expectations for 200. But McGregor's retirement, his holdout, which is very much reminds me of just a typical sports holdout. You don't like your contract, you don't like your deal. You just, it happens all the time in sports. It happens all the time with actors on TV series and stuff. They have it under contract, but they don't like the contract, and they say, well, go ahead without me. We had Cam in Seattle held out a little while ago. This is very similar.
God, why can't
Chancellor.
Cam Chancellor, why can't I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My mind was thinking Cam Newton as soon as I said Cam. It threw me off too. So Cam Chancellor, Seattle. It's typical in other sports, especially sports that, unlike where baseball is arbitration, it's typical in other sports that don't, is that if you don't like your contract, you hold out, and it's who can resist longer. What hurts Conor is that the UFC, it's not a team sport where he's really hurting the team, and they're losing money, and their record's going downhill if he holds out. They're sitting around and going, well, we got Jones Cormier we can put on. We got Ronda coming back. We can put on a fight with Robbie Lawler that will at least make us money. So his leverage is much weaker, and I think what's going to happen is eventually they'll concede something to him, so he'll save some face, but he'll have to give in to almost, pretty much give in to what the UFC wants, toe the line, and then they'll just book another fight. He makes good money for an MMA fighter, but from what I understand, and who knows, this could be wrong, but it doesn't sound like, from what I hear, that he's so wealthy. He's not in that Mayweather-Pacquiao type, where he's sitting on so much Klitschko money where he can walk away now, or at least walk away with what he has, that he wants to walk away with this money. He wants to fight again and make some more money. And so he'll cave in. That's my prediction. Tell me I'm wrong.
No, I agree. I think it'll be something where the UFC will, give him some concessions to save face for Conor, and Conor could come back the Lion champ or whatever, and just and he'll be able to promote the next and fight on the next supercard, which wherever that will be. And I think that definitely and just to come back to the Cam Chancellor thing, if you recall, he came back after like 2 or 3 games without a raise, without anything. The team had lost a couple key games, and he still, even now, hasn't resolved anything with his contract. So I don't know. I went on a tangent because I'm a Seahawks fan. Sorry, but long story short, I do think that the two sides, McGregor and the UFC, will come back together. Whether it means a pay raise or whatnot for McGregor, we'll see.
Well, the real losers in all of this are me and Jason, right? We're the real losers because we're going to be out there, and don't you love Irish Vegas?
Oh yeah, that would be fun. They'll still be there, won't they?
I don't know. Irish Vegas for McGregor is fun.
Were you there last time in December?
Yeah, I've been there twice, I think, for Irish Vegas.
With McGregor fights?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's gonna be too bad. That'll be fun. We'll be down there.
You guys luck out because I heard the story. The UFC's planning. They're stealing from Bellator. They're doing a 4-man light heavyweight tournament with Cormier, Jones, Gustafson, and Rumble in one night. I just made that up.
one night at the Stations Casino.
Yeah, just like one day. It'd be like, holy crap! UFC went full on Pride for one. Actually, that would be an awesome tournament. I take that back. Please, if anybody from UFC is listening, I don't, forget safety and forget tradition and not do the one-night tournament. That's a great one-night tournament. I'd watch the shit out of that one.
John just did his best Darren Rovell.
Yeah.
Booyah.
Just making shit up. But well, I guess that kind of segues into the squabble between the UFC and Conor McGregor and fighter, promoter dynamic. It kind of segues us into the Ali Act. In boxing, the Ali Act was introduced as you guys know, and I'm sure most of our people listening to this are incredibly erudite, urbane listeners of this and followers of this show. The Ali Act was introduced and enacted in 2000. The Muhammad Ali Reform Boxing Act was a bill passed of federal legislation with the intent to protect the economic interest of boxers. So their economic health was the focus of that bill. Now it seems that there's a Congressman Mark Wayne Mullen, a man so tough he has two first names in his first name. He is saying he's going to propose an amendment to the Ali Act so that it also covers MMA. And I guess lobbying him are a group of fighters from the MMAFA, who've Kung Lee and Nate Corey were out visiting him. They're pushing him to do this. And so the question, I guess, for you guys is, do you think the Ali Act will do anything in MMA? And if so, do you think it's a positive or negative? Paul, we'll start with you since you're on my screen.
I was going to point at Jason and have him go first.
Yeah, well, Jason's the legal expert. Maybe he should be the one to go first.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, you want me to go first? So here is my legal answer to that question. It depends. So,
lawyerish.
Yeah.
Lawyerish.
So I definitely think that an amendment to include MMA fighters in the Ali Act would be great, but I caution it from the perspective of you want to make it something that is serviceable rather than just a PR thing. So what I'm saying is, it has to have some bite. It has to have something where MMA fighters can work with it. If you go through the cases where boxers have sued under the Ali Act, there's only really just one, I believe Jeff Lacey, where they have prevailed under the Ali Act. I mean, you get a lot of these things, and like a lot of the cases include Don King, Top Rank. I mean, main event. Jeff Lacey main event was the actual case, but you come across these instances where if a fighter with limited resources has to go up against a promoter like Don King with a lot of resources, you're going to have a disparity in disparity, and basically it comes to a point where the boxer doesn't have that much wherewithal, that doesn't have that much money to litigate a case, or they just can't find an attorney to take the case for whatever reason. What I do think is interesting is if there is an association, a component of this, where fighters are able to pay a nominal fee or pay a fee to assist in litigating these types of cases. I think you might see some bite to the act. I definitely think that I'd like to see what amendments are being made and how the Ali Act can be adjusted for MMA fighters. I think in the end, if it's something that can be utilized, it would be a great thing.
Yeah, and I'll going off of that. I mean, consider me a skeptic. Not a skeptic that something's going to get passed, but a skeptic right now that whatever gets passed is going to have bite. Once it goes through the UFC lobby machine. And John pointed out in his piece, and if you just read the Ali Act, you'll see that you can't just move it over from boxing to MMA. There need to be a lot of changes. And so when I look at it, I think that let's just assume something gets passed. Whatever finally gets passed is just not going to have too much bite to it. The coercive contracts about signing with a promoter and because you need or want to fight a certain boxer, like that, in my opinion, will be gone. What else is there? There's the FTC filing. Okay, fine. There's the FTC filing. The part that could maybe have bite is the disclosures. That's the one area. But there's a lot of information out there. We know how much pay-per-views generally sell. We know what the price are. We know what the split is. John's finance piece told us a lot about other areas in UFC finances. So if managers don't have a lot of this information already, they're just crappy managers. So I'm just not sure how much that's going to do. The best part would be the disclosures. What else? There's still a firewall. But for the UFC, that doesn't matter. That would affect smaller promoters. They might even have an exception where the firewall only comes in at a certain size, right? You see that with legislation sometimes. You have to be of a size business for this to affect you. So when I see it, I'm not convinced that when whatever is finally written, and assuming it gets through, that it will have too much bite to it, except maybe for the disclosures. What do you think, John?
Well, I think the disclosure is big. I think, and it's funny because before I did that Zuffa Finance thing, I talked to a lot of managers, and they really didn't know what UFC was making. And we talk about the pay-per-view, but most fighters aren't getting a pay-per-view cut, so that's not a priority to them. They're on TV, so they didn't know how much they're making off their TV stuff.
Right.
So I've talked to a lot of fighters and a lot of boxing promoters. It's one thing me to do an article and they go, well, maybe that's what we make. It's another thing when they have someone come up and say, this is the TV revenue we're getting paid for we're making $2.5 million on this. The gate's going to be this. We're getting a foreign market of this. You go, holy crud, you're bringing in $5 or $6 million on this event, and I'm making $80,000 in the main event. So a lot of guys said that would be a big thing. And the other one I think is small but nice is the boxers. If you ever look at a boxing contract, they're usually much simpler. Why? Because you go to any ABC website, there's a template you can download, and so you have a template to show up to as your first boxing contract as a beginning boxer. Hey, just fill in here, and this is what we're going to use. Where in MMA, you might sign over a ton of rights as a beginning MMA fighter and not realize it because there's no place to look up and say, oh, we're just going to use the template given on the ABC. The parts it gets weird, and this is the part where it can be drastically change stuff. The firewall. One is the firewall. And the firewall, and there's supposedly a firewall between managers and promoters under the Ali Act. And that means you can't be a manager for people out there and you can't be a promoter at the same time, because as a manager you have fiduciary responsibility. As a promoter you have a job to screw people over to make as much money as possible. That's how the two jobs work. So the Ali Act says you can't do both, but you can do it if it's below 10 rounds. In other words, a non-sanctioned bout. So for small guys like the Monty Coxes, if there's an MMA version that says, you can do it at the low end, those guys wouldn't be affected. Where it gets weird is the way it says you cannot have a financial interest really outside of being out of the bout, basically, it says in the LA Act. And then you got to start questioning, go, wait a minute, the UFC, they sell your image rights. They have the Reebok deal and they have image right video games. Are those covered under the Ali Act? Does that make the UFC a manager because their financial interest in you is outside of the actual boxing event? And that's where it gets weird. Even though I think people argue that has no effect. That's one of those weird things where you go, wait a minute, that's where someone might interpret that a different way and start trying to enforce that. But the even bigger one, the Ali Act says there has to be a firewall between promoters and sanctioning bodies. There's no sanctioning bodies in MMA. And this came up with rumors that PBC was going to start their own titles, which have been illegal. Is it now illegal for promotions? If the Ali Act came into effect, would it be illegal for promoters to give out their own belts?
Right. I'm assuming that will be gone. That won't be in the new Ali Act. But yeah, if it's still there.
Yeah, but it'd be converted. Would that objective criteria of ratings, would that be in place? In other words, would a promoter have to follow objective third-party criteria of ratings? Which is, the reason behind this stuff, it's a huge win for fighters if it happens, but it could be a loss for fans who like the way MMA is orchestrated. They like the way MMA is organized. Right now, a promoter can pick a fighter to fight for the belt based solely on that the fans want to see that guy, or maybe because he agreed to the contract terms, and the guy that didn't, if you don't agree to their contract terms, they don't want to give you a title shot. Well, that's terrible for a fighter that he has to agree to contract terms to get a title shot. But at the same time, it's great for fans that a promoter can pick the fighter that's more exciting to get the fights that you want to see. And that's where it starts, that's the question mark.
Right. So, John, you talked with Congressman Mullen, right, on the phone?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what? Give us your take on him. Just your take on him from the phone. Like how passionate you thought he was about it. Did he give you any feedback about how well he thought it would go? How easy it would be to push through? Or what did you take away from him?
He's definitely he's an ex-fighter himself, so he actually has he's very much for this. He's very much supportive of it. It's something he wants to do. I think he thinks he seemed like he thought he had a lot of support in Congress. The Senate is his question mark. I think he doesn't know what the Senate will be, and of course Harry Reid's in the Senate. So we'll have to see how how much authority Harry Reid still has in his last year in office. But he definitely thinks he has enough support in Congress, I think, to get it through. The questions I had is I thought that I'm not sure he quite thought out all the sanctioning body. Or maybe he has. I mean, he brought up he thought Bellator and the UFC would be able to keep their belts, but there would be a third-party ranking system. So maybe he's already, but it was hard to follow his thinking on it. But maybe he has a system already in mind how that would work. So he plans on amending the act to fit MMA. That's for sure.
Right.
So I wish I had more information. It was a 20-minute conversation, so it wasn't like we went completely in depth.
Yeah, it seems like the sanction. I mean, I already told you. I basically assumed the sanctioning thing wouldn't go whatever match over. I can't talk right now. Map over. But
it's
because you would think that the state athletic commissions would have to come in somehow and deal with it, but I don't know how the enforcement of a state agency of a federal law would come into play there.
Well, that's what the Mullen seems to think, that the athletic commissions could take over a lot of the responsibility, but I don't know if people want, I mean, the athletic commissions haven't proven 100% confident in everything they handle so far, so I don't know how great it'd be to have the athletic commissions involved. In fact, the athletic commissions, I think they came up with the separate sanctioning bodies because the New York Athletic Commission was the one that used to have the world title, the biggest athletic commission, and they proved to be corrupt as hell as well. So, we get back to that. It's a dilemma because there's a lot of questions. I mean, honest questions involved. Is MMA, is it supposed to be a sport, right? I mean, that's the purpose of the Ali Act, is to protect the athletes, to get the most economic value for their worth. And part of it is that if a promoter controls the belt, they can dictate, basically they can hold that out and say you can't get a title shot until you agree to our terms. But if you take that away from a promoter, that right, then you get into what everybody hates about boxing, which boxing sure may make it much more valuable, much better for the boxers because they make a lot more money. But I guess, do you go with what helps the fighters, or do you go with what the fans want?
I mean, you would. I mean, if you would go with how much whoever brings you the most money, and
whoever gets the most votes in Congress.
Yeah.
I can't. Can you guys see? I cannot see that. I forgot about that part of this interview. I forgot about the commissions possibly doing rankings. That was pretty funny. But can you guys see a scenario in which an Ali Act comes to MMA, and there's some sort of whatever ranking system, however it's done, doesn't matter, some sort of ranking system, but it requires a promoter like the UFC, to go off those rankings, and if the number one contender is from Bellator or somewhere else, that they have to make that fight. Could you see that version of the Ali Act? Because I can't see it happening.
I can't. There's a couple. I mean, there's a couple ways. Some people were laying out a couple scenarios, and the craziest scenario, which would probably be the best for the fighters, but people would freak out, and I doubt it would ever. It's the least likely by far. Would be that the UFC decides to be a sanctioning body and give up promoting. In other words, every promoter competes for their, they have a ranking system that puts the ranking together. They put the fights together for their belt, and people just pay them money to license it out to people. They're, the biggest, wealthiest sanctioning body ever. That ain't going to happen. But that's probably if you think about it, that's probably the one that everybody's happy with, because now everybody fights under the UFC umbrella, and there's massive competition for the fighters. So their pay just skyrockets because every different promoter is competing to put on this title fight or this ranked opponent, these sanctioned ranked opponents together. The other one, I think this was someone explaining to me one of the ideas behind Mullins, is the athletic commissions would have someone ranking it, but they wouldn't do the ranking themselves. They would support. And maybe, I guess, the guys in the Fighters Association would want to be involved in that, like put together a third body ranking system. And if you're a promotion and you decide to have your own promotion title, right, you have to honor the ranking system so that the highest ranked guy on that list who's in your promotion gets to be the mandatory challenger. And then if two different promotions have a fighter at 1 and 2, so they're mandatory challenge from two different promotions, then they would have to allow, they'd either have to, your champ would have to make a bid, maybe a 1-fight bid for the other champion, and they'd either fight, either you sign them into your promotion, or you'd fight for some sort of super trophy that's in between, some sort of super belt that represents neither promotion. And that's kind of how it works, but I'm sure promotions would. I don't think Bellator would fight that. I don't think any promotion, but the UFC would definitely fight that.
Yeah, no. The best is going to fight. Whoever is perceived as the best right now is going to fight it, and everybody else usually is not going to have too much of a problem with it. The first part of what you said, I could maybe see that happening, right? Where you have to do the highest ranked fighter in your promotion. It gets interesting when you have 1 and 2 or champion and 1 fighting, right? And it's a really close fight, and the loser is still ranked as the #1 contender. We get that.
Well, I mean, it doesn't. Yeah. This doesn't eliminate like fun fights, because I think most mandatory challenges, it's like you're allowed. It's within every. I guess in MMA, probably let's say every year you have to do a mandatory challenge. Who's the mandatory challenge? So your fight at the 6-month mark, the promoter could put up number 4 or number 5. And it wouldn't matter. It's the mandatory challenge. It's only when it's a required mandatory challenger would you have to take that 1 or 2.
Right. Yeah. And well, I guess that depends on how they write it. Yeah. How.
Yeah. I mean, it leaves a lot of questions. It's just it could. I guess I'm sure that's why the UFC is they don't want it, because it depends how it comes out. It could either it does very little or it drastically changes the business model. So I mean, and for fans, it could be. If done right, it could be great for the fighters, and the fans won't mind at all. If it goes the opposite way, the fighters might love it and the fans might hate it. But one thing it won't do is it won't make MMA boxing in the sense that everybody's like, oh, MMA is going to turn. Aliak destroyed boxing. I don't see that logic. All the sanctioning bodies existed before the Ali Act. It wasn't like they sprang up after the Ali Act. There was already 5 belts before the Ali Act. So that's an argument that doesn't quite make sense to me.
Right. What do you think? When will this happen? Will it happen? When will it happen? Do you think it will have some bite? What would your best guess be right now?
Let's go. For me, I'll say it's going to be proposed for sure. I think it'll be proposed soon. Let's say sometime within the next 30 days. Will it happen? I don't. I think it has it has a better than no chance. I mean, it has a decent chance, like 10, 20, 30% chance of getting through legislation. But I would favor it not happening. I got to favor it would die in Congress at some point. But there is still a solid 20, 30% chance, I think, that everything goes their way and it somehow slips through and Obama signs it.
What do you think, Jason?
It'll be interesting to see how it plays out and what kind of support it gets, what kind of play it gets right now. I definitely think that protection of I mean, with the popularity of the UFC is now common mainstream. People know what the UFC is, and it'll be interesting to see what the narrative will be in the media when this proposal is introduced into Congress. I just think that there'll be a lot of comparisons to boxing. Quite frankly, I think we might see something comparable to what we saw in the New York Assembly that day when they had everybody talk, and it was just a big, entertaining thing. But if nothing else, you could plant the seeds for the education of MMA and what is going on. And I think that maybe if you could benchmark this thing, you introduce it, maybe it most likely will not pass, but you get your feelers out there with a lot of the Congress people to tell you to educate and see what this act is supposed to do. And we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I'm remembering back in early 2000s when there was a Supreme Court ruling that allowed for that sort of loosened the rules on minimum resale price maintenance, which is like a type of vertical price fixing, and so a lot of people didn't like that it was easier to do that easier to do that legally now. And so Hillary Clinton and a few other people proposed a bill to effectively tighten the rules on that again. And it went into Congress, nothing happened with it. They re-proposed it in a new Congress, nothing happened with it. And I don't think anything ever passed. So it got under people's skin a little bit, but nothing ever came of it. I'm just not sure, in our world out here, the United States, how big an issue, what I mean is outside of the MMA bubble, how big an issue this really is. So I would go with you guys. I think odds favor that probably at the end of the day nothing passes. If something does pass, especially once the UFC throws their money at it, I'm just not sure how effective it will be. But I would put the odds on nothing happening. But who knows? With the antitrust case, maybe the outcome of that might spark more interest in Ali acts if it doesn't go well for the fighters, which kind of transitions us into our last segment of the day, which is 2 weeks ago I did an interview with Josh Wright, who was the former commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission, and he was a commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission in 2015 when the UFC was investigated. The last time, the original UFC investigation from the Federal Trade Commission was in 2011 for the Strikeforce merger. It was actually the Strikeforce merger, and I think it was some general term, other things that could violate antitrust. I don't remember exactly how they phrased it. The 2015 one investigation was specifically for the UFC's use of exclusive contracts, which is basically what the antitrust lawsuit is about. So I interviewed Josh Wright, and he was able to talk about some things. And the reason we're going to talk about it is he put out a few things that kind of new pieces of information, cleared things up a little bit. I know, at least in my discussions with you, John, and it started with the Strikeforce merger. We've talked a lot about the Strikeforce merger in the past, right? And so he had a segment in there where he basically says, let me give you the exact quote. He basically says, where is it? I was not at the FTC during the investigation, but I can safely assume that the FTC came to the conclusion that while a post-merger UFC would be the leading MMA firm by any reasonable metric, the firm would lack the market power necessary to increase price. So the focus is on output, the focus is on consumers, and that's sort of, he basically says, hey, we investigated after the fact. We weren't allowed to investigate beforehand, which answers questions for some people. And we investigated after the fact, and we can assume that we pretty much found nothing. What did you guys take away? How do you react to that? What did you take away when you read that?
Well, I think what's fascinating about that is that, and he said in the later response too, both of them come together, is what they looked at was not the effect on the fighters and purses, which was a big worry. He looked at the consumer. And that's, he's, I mean, who am I to say? He doesn't sound like somebody who knows what he's talking about, but no, I'm just kidding. But that was something I'm like, I didn't quite think of that, because I thought the FTC, I thought it wasn't only consumer-based. I thought it was that they would look at the employees too, how it would affect the labor market, the wages. But what he was saying is that we on both this and his opinion of later research into the later one and also the antitrust case, is that how does it affect the consumer? And that's fascinating because I guess the biggest thing is the implications it has in the antitrust lawsuit. Is what he's saying is no matter how it affects the fighters, that they might not have a case, because no matter what damages are done to them, no matter how unfair the system might be, it's based solely on what happens to consumers. And I thought that was, wow, that's eye-opening.
Yeah, it kind of meshes with what one thing I mentioned to you in the very beginning is just it was a little weird that the fighters are bringing this lawsuit to begin with. It's not that they can't bring it, it was just unusual, because when the story is that these contracts are putting other rival promoters at a competitive disadvantage, then what you'd expect is that one of those promoters would sue you, right? That's the normal way the story would go. I'm putting you at a disadvantage, you get mad, you sue me. It's not they have a story where the fighters are hurt as well, but Jason, what did you take away from the
Well, I think that it was a very well done done interview, and I do think I do piggyback with John in that it was eye-opening that you do. I mean, having not done in antitrust law a lot, you don't realize the impact of these things, and it would be interesting to have seen whether or not if a Bellator or WSOF could have brought an antitrust suit, because it does basically, just reading through this article and just doing it as we were talking, it doesn't look good for the plaintiffs at this point. Well, I mean, it's still up in the air, but if you were to take Dr. Wright's comments here into consideration, it doesn't paint a very good picture for the future of this.
No, it doesn't. And one of the things that it shows is that antitrust is really it's kind of a different animal. People look at companies out there and like, wow, they're a big company, they have to be doing things bad. And again, the case isn't over yet. But if you read through this, I don't think you can read through this without adjusting your odds of the UFC, of the fighters winning or getting a good settlement, lowering those odds substantially, because he talks about the focus on the consumer, right? And that even if fighters' wages are found to go down, there still has to be this effect on the consumer, which explains why the monopoly stuff was in there. And then if you go back, a few months ago, we were all saying, what's the weakest part? Do you remember our answers? Everything one of us, even John.
Yeah.
I can't recall. No, Monopoly. It was Monopoly.
I know. And it was just like, oh, crap. But I mean,
they have to go a roundabout way to show. I guess they'd have to probably show that without, if there was more competition, there'd be less pay-per-views and less fights. But in other words, there'd be less charged medium you'd be watching. You'd be watching more free TV or something like that. So, but that's a roundabout way to have to go about to prove that as that's my argument for damaging consumers, that we would have less pay-per-views.
Right. So, I know, and then there was, and I mean, you can't read it without thinking that the odds go way down. And he had the monopoly and monopsony, and he said, basically, trust us. We look at monopsony issues too. Remember that part of it?
Yeah.
It was some people might not think that we do, but we've examined that. And one of the key areas that stood out to me is when I asked him, so exclusive contracts are being examined now under the Sherman Act. In 2015, they were examined by you guys under the FTC Act. Would they have been examined the same way, or would there be key differences? And he said the analysis should be uniform. What do you guys make of that? I mean, to me, he's basically saying we pretty much analyze this. Now, I think there's more discovery in the antitrust case, right? There's something like 100,000 documents in the FTC case, and there's going to be like 1 million or so in this case. So there's more discovery that's going to come out. But he basically said we analyzed it the way it should be analyzed in court right now.
This is the one part, and no one brings this up, but I always think this was and you guys laugh at me because you guys know what you're talking about, and I make shit up. But the part that I think is going to have a big part in this case, and I always thought it'd have a big part in this case, and is where I get the Monopoly broth idea from, thrown into it, where most people don't think Monopoly broth has a part, is the International Boxing Club of New York, the U.S. versus International Boxing Club of New York. And that set a precedent of what is a monopoly. A monopoly in boxing was that they demanded that all the contenders signed long-term contracts to fight the champ. And I was just curious. I guess you didn't have a chance to bring that up. If they looked at that case in their investigation, did that play any part in it? If they did, and it didn't play any part, well, that's really bad news for the plaintiffs. If they didn't look at it, well, I think that's the crux of the fighter's lawsuit, is that's based a lot on that concept that by owning a title, you have monopoly on the title, and that you are by denying or making fighters give away their rights to get access to that title, your control of it can be considered a restraint to trade. So that's the one part, I guess, that if you're the fighters, you're hoping that wasn't in the FTC calculations.
Yeah.
You
Go
know, I
ahead.
would think that they would have to have taken that case into consideration at this point. I mean, it just sounds like that the FTC's investigation or evaluation of the situation here encompassed all of that, and I don't think that they would have left out that case. I mean, that's my assumption anyway, and if that's the case, then you know, it's a little bleak from if you're taking up Dr. Wright's perspective.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard when you look at old cases. I mean, just
Yes.
because when you look at ones that are sort of, it's quite common to see ones that were done 50, 60 years ago that the at least the economics of them has kind of changed, or the antitrust view of them has changed. The field has sort of moved on. I'm not going to take up international boxing right now, but for Monopoly Broth, he ended up saying, kind of saying, I'm not really, I don't really think the Monopoly Broth thing holds very much, and probably not here. But I think that's still debatable. To me, the plaintiffs are going to come in, they're going to make their Monopoly Broth argument, and the UFC is going to fight it and defend it. And I don't know if we know for sure which will win right now. But the main thing was saying, hey, look, even if fighter pay is shown to go down, the UFC is going to fight that too. But even if it's shown to reduce fighter pay, that's not what's going to make or break this case. That's what I thought was the real eye opener, right? That whether Monopoly Broth wins or not, if you can't show harm to consumers at some point along the way, that this case is in a lot of trouble. And that's sort of the real question: is
And,
can we
and
show harm?
unlike the high tech case in San Jose with the Google and Apple, that which was an antitrust case where they were conspiring to lower wages, that probably didn't affect the consumer either. This is a single entity. I mean, we were talking about that. This is a single entity, so it doesn't have the conspiracy element, the cartel element. That case had, which makes that, I guess, an easier case to which is a whole separate thing. So you can bring that charge without worrying about consumers.
Yeah, for people who don't know, we were talking off camera, and when you're a group of companies, you can't get together and conspire to raise prices or to lower wages. And that high tech case was about allegedly a conspiracy to lower wages, lower manager salaries. But that was a group of them, essentially kind of being a cartel. And this is the UFC being one company only. So what we've been doing kind of predictions at the end of every segment. How put a number or a value or a word on how you thought this new information here affected your view of the antitrust case. What would you think?
I guess it would drastically. I guess the International Boxing Club of New York case is still, that component is out there. I guess because it's if owning a title, if a title could be, if you can monopolize a title, then I think it gives the fighter still a stronger case. But based on his stuff, it sounds like it's lowered their odds. But I guess there's always been the argument too: is it going to the end? They're going to fight to the end, or is it still good enough with them and the judge they have to get some sort of settlement or to push it further along? And so odds of an outright win or a huge win seem much lower, but
I will say one thing. I will say one thing about the judge really quick, since I've been there, right? I saw the San Jose judge and the Vegas judge,
Yeah.
and maybe it could have been the material of the meetings, right? What was actually being discussed, sorry, of the hearings, what was being discussed, but the San Jose judge seemed to be bashing into the plaintiffs and not the UFC. The Vegas judge was bashing into the UFC and not the plaintiffs. So at least that's a good start, but it could be just the material that was being discussed. But
could be the UFC's like, damn it, we should have stayed in San Jose.
I know.
They know this stuff better. So
You get to that Vegas judge, and he was tearing in them from the beginning. Like, oh crap, San Jose, I miss you. All right, Jason, what do you think?
Well, I think two things. I think first of all, Monopoly Broth it doesn't seem to be just like with what Dr. Wright is saying here, and just like from other things I've read, doesn't seem to be a very popular legal theory when it comes to antitrust law. It just seems like it's never it's a very remote chance when you're talking about the claims, and it kind of seems to be similar here with what Dr. Wright is saying. And so with respect to a prediction, I would have to think that there has to be an opposing view from Dr. Wright. I think if we were to get another interview with someone else who has a directly opposite view, maybe we think, oh, wait a second, maybe the fighters do actually have a chance. But with that being said, with what's been laid out by Dr. Wright, I definitely think that, it's going to be coming close when you get to a dispositive motion. When you get to summary judgment stage, which will happen, it does. You kind of get that feeling that it's the chance for the judge to dismiss this case at that point. Whether or not that happens, we'll see if there's a issue of fact that the plaintiffs can point out to rebut a summary judgment. But obviously, that's what it sounds like it's heading toward.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say on my end. I think you have to be, the plaintiff side has to be really worried about losing at summary judgment right now. I think both sides will file, my guess, and I think the fighters have almost 0% chance of winning at summary judgment. And now, and at least in my mind, I would give the UFC a pretty good chance of winning outright at summary judgment now. And if they don't, again, the case possibly being significantly narrowed, and for the fighters' side to have things narrowed in a way that would help them, the odds of that get a lot lower. I think now there's a really good chance the UFC wins at summary judgment. Or if we move on, we're probably not going to trial. I wouldn't expect a really great settlement. The UFC seems to be in a stronger position than we thought. I know it sounds weird to say that in an antitrust case because there's such a huge part of the MMA industry, but I wouldn't expect a really good settlement. And I've been saying that all along, but it changes my perception of the settlement that we might get.
I mean, what he said changes my opinion. But on this disclaimer, something doesn't pop up in discovery. That they don't present someone. Holy crap! We did not see that. We didn't.
Absolutely.
We did not see that they were, that they had bugged everybody's office. No one saw that coming. No one saw the hit list.
By no means is anything decided. This is all odds, right?
Yeah.
There's that Pride email that's going on. For those who don't know, the case is in discovery right now, and the two sides are arguing over whether a Pride email should be privileged. Some lawyer said something that sounds like about the competitive landscape, what's going to happen, like if they buy Pride or something like that. There's some statement in there about it. Maybe it's like we can own the world, or
yeah. I mean, if it just changes everything. If it comes out that the statement was, "My God, if we buy Pride, we have a monopoly over the industry."
If we buy Pride, we can jack up pay-per-view prices by $20.
Yeah, and then no one can compete with us. We've lied. I mean, if they literally spell, if the next email coming on them is the complaint from the plaintiffs, then we completely change our position. I'm telling you right now. And if you listen closely with Discovery going on, they hear that noise there. That's the sound of all the MMA managers shredding their paperwork. You just know. I mean, knowing what I know about a lot of MMA managers, you know their stuff. They don't want their fighters to know they've been doing. So they're like I'm sure they're all just. A lot of them are like just holding their breath, like please don't call me, please don't call me. So
please don't put me under oath.
Yeah, please don't put me under oath. I do not want to have to testify why, how I came to that agreement, with this fighter, because, I mean, UFC ain't gonna care. They're just doing their job. But then you find out, I'm sure there's a lot of fighters that'll be very intrigued to know what deals their promoter was cutting behind their back. So.
Exactly. And one more thing, for all those people, oh my God, Dana White does not want to be deposed people. One thing we learned was that he's probably already been deposed by the Federal Trade Commission, and those transcripts have probably already been handed over to the fighters, to the plaintiffs in this case. Dana White, it's got to be that Dana White and Lorenzo Fertitta have been deposed already. Not got to be, but in all likelihood, by FTC attorneys.
I guess the other interesting thing about this, we could on the segue, the final one is that for the fighters, because these are the same guys, a lot of the same people filing the lawsuit are the same people that are trying to push the Ali Act through, are the same people trying to start a fighters association. If you listen to, I don't know if you guys heard Ryan Jimmo's recent interview on, I think it was some Irish radio, Severe MMA. He was on. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure the lawyers that represent him are trying to win as much money as possible, but I'm not 100% certain that the guys that filed this suit, if it's already not having the impact they want. Because if you look at the history of the NFLPA, it started with lawsuits against the NFL, antitrust lawsuits, to basically force them to accept an association and to get them to change their behavior because the damages of repeated lawsuits are too much. And they make the argument that in fact we talked about it before, Paul, that maybe the UFC's behavior has changed because they don't want to have to deal with these lawsuits, that they're not using some of the provisions that they're being sued for. If you look at that, it looks like this. Part of it wonders, is this part of the plan? This is the plan for the guys that are trying to create an association. Part of our plan is one side will be suing, the other side will be trying to organize.
Yeah, no, I mean I agree. I think the industry is changing, and the great thing for the fighters doing this is, even if, let's just pretend the UFC does win on summary judgment, they don't lose any money, right? It's all the lawyers. Rob Macy might not be happy about it. I don't know. Right? But at least they're not out money. But this is part of the process of, you can see things building and changing in the industry, and if things turn out a little bit worse on this end, might it help the movement towards the Ali Act, right, or the association down the line? I don't know. What do you think, Jason?
Yeah, I think that if you are going to affect change, and obviously could be done through this lawsuit, even if you don't win, but there are changes that occur, Ali Act or an association is made. I think if you are a true, I guess, if you are a true person for MMA, just a true MMA, what's right for the fighters, then you're definitely happy about it. Obviously, if you are a lawyer for the plaintiffs in the antitrust lawsuit, you're not very happy if it's not going to go. If you're not going to win and you're not going to get a settlement, it's not going to be an issue. But if you do feel for the fighters, and if better things are made for the fighters, then you're okay with it. But speaking as an attorney, you probably would rather have won.
Yeah, I'm sure. I wonder if the plaintiffs' lawyers are watching. They're like, wait a minute.
That guy.
Wait, you're winning even when we don't win? This is not what we signed up for.
They're like, we're the opposing opinion.
We're being used.
I get emails like, hey, I need to talk to you for a sec. They just to lay into you, yell at you.
No, but I mean, it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong on this, John, you've been in the industry a lot longer than I think both of us, definitely me.
Yeah.
It just feels like we get just a lot more discussion out there these days about fighter pay, about free agency, about, it just feels like there's that shift in attitude and in less fear, or is what it feels like.
Drastic shift. I mean, it's just talking to people, they say it too, and it's and it's weird too, because the more things change, and the more, I guess, opening, and the more people are able to, I guess, fight out their contracts and go to Bellator, you see even more hostility and resentment bubbling up, which is, you'd think it would kind of dissipate, that people would say, oh, things are getting better, but people seem to be building up more and more hostility and resentment the more things start to change. It reminds me of what's going on in our politics with, the Trump and Sanders supporters and stuff. That people, fighters were just, and managers too, were so frustrated with the way the system was working that even when things are getting better, I don't know if it's good enough for them. That they want, they want drastic change. So it's, I mean, and in that case too, I mean, I think it seems likely the lawsuit had a big impact, because we all know in the past stuff like there's Brandon Vera's case where he was told that he had his contract was being extended when it was over, and he ended up resigning, dropping his manager. Arlovsky and Horta were frozen out. There's all these cases, famous cases in the past of fighters not leaving the UFC, and when I'm talking to people behind the scenes, fighters will get that notice in the mail that says, "Oh, your contract's been extended," but the UFC never uses it anymore. And so is that, it seems plausible. I don't know if it's true or not. It seems plausible that the lawsuit had some effect on that they're not using that provision anymore in the contracts. So the people that are able to enter the market and go to Bellator and stuff and test the market finally, this is something that wouldn't have happened 2 years ago, or it seems less likely it would have happened 2 years ago.
Right.
So in that sense, it seems to be working.
I don't know if this is correct or not, but it definitely seems like there's more action taking place here in the mixed martial arts than in boxing. Where I'm not sure if it's just because people are more active and the lawsuit has facilitated people to speak up or kind of decide to test free agency or what it is. But I definitely think feels as though MMA fighters are more willing to test free agency and to affect change.
Well, I mean, boxing, people change promotions all the time, so I don't think it's as big a deal. I don't think people are shocked, but I think part of it goes by in boxing. There's just a lot more competition. There's a lot more. There's so much. Was it unions are most effective, most plausible when there's little competition, so you get frustrated when there's tons of competition for your services. You don't care about having some sort of representation because you just go to highest bidder. I think that's kind of boxing right now. But MMA, partly I think we got some possibly more educated athletes because there's guys come out of college because of the wrestling programs. There's no boxing programs in college, so guys come up with wrestling programs with education. And the other thing is, I think because of the UFC's success, the UFC is they've made this themselves by being so successful that they're so successful that everybody's only competing against them, and it's like dealing with the NFL or the NBA or that you have to take on the one structure, the one organization. There's not hopping around like there is in other sports or other industries.
Yeah, until Ben Henderson, the freedom to go get your ass kicked by Koreshkov, right?
Who knew? Maybe everybody, but I
that was
Poor
yeah.
guy.
That was I was intrigued. I found that incredibly entertaining, to tell you the truth, and I like Benson Henderson. But
I did too, and I like him too.
That was such a great performance by him. But good for him. He cashed out. I mean, people don't have to leave the UFC. That's the other thing I don't get about the complaint. Oh, he's testing the market. Leave the UFC. Why? All you want to do is that either you go somewhere that pays you more, or the UFC pays you more to stay. You want that option. That's all people are asking for, is the option to either go somewhere so you can get paid more, or compel the promotion you're with to pay you more because you have an option. If you have no option, they're not compelled to pay you more.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, I think a perfect example of that is Neil Magny. I think that he put himself in a position that he was able to secure a 4-fight deal after his last fight against, what's his name?
I forget too. Who was it?
He was just. He's the
Lombard?
guy.
Was it Lombard?
Lombard.
Yeah.
Lombard. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. And so, I mean, I think he's kind of a good example simply because he's a guy that you wouldn't have really thought about unless you're a hardcore UFC guy. But he worked his way up, and then he secured a deal, 4-fight deal, kind of like without a lot of fanfare. So, anyway.
Yeah. All right, guys. Anything else? Anything else we want to add here? Any secrets you want to divulge, John, before we go?
I'll do that off the air.
Damn it. All right, everybody. Thanks for hanging in there with us. Until the next time, keep doing business as usual.